Good evening. I'd like to call the March 16th meeting of the Issaquah Development Commission to order. It's right now 7:02. Welcome, and due to the virtual nature of tonight's meeting, I'd like to start by just providing a few guidelines that should help with the meeting. We have participants that may be attending by computer and others by phone. For all the meeting attendees, just please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before you speak. Mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And if you're having technical issues, there's always the option to join by another device like a smartphone or a tablet, and or the fallback call-in phone number that you can find on the meeting announcement. Tonight, we have one item on the agenda, the continuation of the public hearing for the Providence Heights School project. This is a quasi-judicial matter that is in front of the commission. So let's get started by calling roll. So Lucy, if you'd call roll, and commissioners, if you would unmute your microphone and say here when your name's called.
Chair Brennan.
Here.
Commissioner Sanford.
Here.
Commissioner Soa.
Here.
Commissioner Dillon.
Here.
Commissioners Shore and Price have excused absences. Commissioner Ikeda.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Thank you, Lucy. So I want to just note quickly that the alternates, Commissioners Morgan and Ikeda, are serving as regular commission members this evening due to the resignation of one of the regular commission members and recusal by one of our other commission members. So we do have a backlog of meeting minutes that we need to get through for our first kind of housekeeping business here. So I want to start with each one of these meeting minutes. Hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to read through those. So starting with the November 17th meeting minutes, does anybody have any corrections for the meeting minutes from November 17th, 2021? Okay, hearing none, the minutes for November 17th, 2021 are approved. Meeting minutes for February 2nd, 2022. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes from February 2nd? Hearing none, meeting minutes for February 2nd, 2022 are approved. February 10, 2022. We've been busy. Any corrections to the minutes for February 10th? Hearing none, the minutes for February 10, 2022 are approved. March 2nd, 2022. Any corrections to the March 2nd meeting minutes? Seeing none, the March 2nd, 2022 meeting minutes are approved. And finally, the March 3rd, 2022 meeting minutes. Any corrections from the commission? Seeing none, the meeting minutes for March 3rd, 2022 are hereby approved. Says a lot about our minutes taker, doing a great job for us. Appreciate that. I do want to provide an opportunity to open the floor for any member of the public that would like to comment on topics that are not before the commission at tonight's public hearing. So if you are on the phone and not on a computer, please press *3 on your phone, or if you're on a computer, use the virtual raise hand to be recognized. Lucy, do we have anyone who would like to speak on a topic that is not before the commission this evening?
I'm just reviewing the people in the audience. I do not see anyone who has raised their hand.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the continuation of the public hearing for the Providence Heights project. So tonight is a continuation of the public hearing that commenced on March 2nd on the master site plan. And I get to read the numbers again, so be patient with me here. Master site plan MSP 20-00001, the site development permit SDP 20-00001, and 5 administrative adjustments of standards AAS 20-00012, AAS 21-00001, AAS 21-00002, AAS 00005, AAS 21-00006, and these are all for the Providence Heights project. So oral comment was completed at our March 3rd portion of this public hearing. So I just want to remind folks that we won't be taking any additional oral testimony this evening. Tonight's public hearing will be the following steps. First of all, we'll do the appearance of fairness disclosures, standard procedure for our hearings. Applicant rebuttal, if there is one, then followed by a staff rebuttal, if there is one. Opportunity for, after the rebuttals, the commissioners to ask questions. We move then into commission deliberation. We have an opportunity to discuss the proposal. And then if the commission is comfortable this evening, we can move to an action on the item before the commission. So I want to remind the commission that following the rebuttal, the public hearing will be closed. And when we close the public hearing, additional questions cannot be directed at the applicant. So I want to make sure we get through all of our questions before we close the public hearing and begin our final deliberation on the project. So Lucy, let's move forward with the appearance of fairness disclosures with questionings about the commission and those particular disclosures. So I'll hand it to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Chairperson. As we've discussed, a quasi-judicial proceeding is required to be both fair in fact and appearance, similar to a courtroom setting. Ex parte contacts are prohibited. These are communications outside of the hearing between a decision maker and an opponent or proponent of the matter at hand. If such communications have occurred, record of the substance of the communication must be placed on the record to allow other interested parties the right to rebut the substance of the communication. The test would be, would a disinterested person, having been apprised of the totality of a decision maker's personal interest in a matter being acted upon, be reasonably justified in thinking that partiality may exist? Decision makers who have personal interest, prejudgment of issues, or partiality are disqualified from the proceedings. So as you may remember, we have a slide with a series of questions. Please read through these and raise your actual hand when you have finished reading so I can call roll. Okay. Chair Brennan, how do you answer?
I answered no to all the questions.
Commissioner Sanford?
No to all.
Commissioner Soa?
No to all.
Commissioner Dillon?
Yes to question 3. My company has a business relationship with the applicant's engineer. We have had no discussions or involvement on this project, however. And
Thank you.
I don't see that there is any impingement on my ability to judge this on the merits of the information provided. And no to the rest of the questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Ikeda?
No to all.
Commissioner Morgan?
And no to all except for number 3. My in-laws live within the Providence Point community. I've not discussed the project with them, and I don't believe it would impact my judgment.
And then for the overall question, please read it, raise your hand when you're ready to answer, and I will call roll again. Chair Brennan, how do you answer?
Yes.
Commissioner Sanford?
Yes.
Commissioner Soa?
Yes.
Commissioner Dillon?
Yes.
Commissioner Ikeda?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
I'm going to read through this and then I'll stop sharing my screen in case there is an objection. Does anyone in attendance wish to challenge the participation of any commissioner based on appearance of fairness doctrine? If you have an objection, raise your virtual hand or type objection into the chat window. When called upon, please state the name of the member and the reasons why you believe they should be disqualified from this matter. I am checking to see if anyone has provided an objection. I've not received a chat, and I see no hands raised.
Thank you, Lucy. So we'll move on to the next step, which is the rebuttal from the applicant. So this is an opportunity for the applicant consultant team to address the commission. Commissioners, if you would please hold your questions until they finish their presentation. And then if you do have questions, type question in the chat, and make sure you've got it listed for everyone in the chat feature. So I will hand it to the applicant team, an opportunity to provide rebuttal.
Todd, will you be the presenter?
Yes, ma'am.
I have made you the presenter, so you should be able to share.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Brennan and members of the commission. My name is Denise Stiffarm with Pacifica Law Group, and I am the outside legal counsel for the Issaquah School District. As you know, the district submitted written rebuttal briefing to the commission. And tonight, instead of repeating all of that information, we plan to highlight some of the key points relevant to the scope of your determination. We have also read the city's rebuttal materials and adopt those points by reference. We acknowledge that our rebuttal submittal likely over-responds, but it is important to us that accurate facts and information are presented to the commission and included within the record. That said, our rebuttal focuses on issues outside of the scope or not fully addressed by the record and is not duplicative of the evidence or analysis already before the commission. In a few minutes, I'm going to turn the district's rebuttal presentation over to the design team, who will introduce themselves. But first, I want to touch on a few issues that were raised in public comment. First, as you know, the scope of the Development Commission's review is limited to whether the project meets the applicable criteria in the city code for approval of the land use application. And here specifically, that is the master site plan, the site development permit, and the 5 administrative adjustments of standards. What is not before you, despite public comments suggesting otherwise, is a relitigation of the basis for the comprehensive plan map amendment and rezone, including its accompanying environmental review. What is not before you is an appeal of the district's project level SEPA determination, nor is a determination of how the district programs its capacity and educational needs or how it funds its schools. And also what is not before you is a review of the construction permits related to the project. On the latter point, nothing in the land use criteria requires, and no party has presented authority to support a requirement that fully developed construction permits be submitted with the land use application. And that makes sense because the land use approval precedes and informs those construction permits, and the land use approval does not on its own authorize any construction or land disturbance. Construction permits, even those in review now, will be informed by the land use approval and its conditions. I'd next like to address some claims that the staff report inaccurately describes the proposal because the district plans to phase construction with the elementary school in a subsequent phase. The reality is that the code requires that a master site application include any proposed project phasing, and it delineates approval criteria for each proposed phase. Simply put, the code expects phasing, and the staff report and the record appropriately identified that phasing plan. The district superintendent in his presentation to you confirmed the district's need and continued planning for that elementary school. And Mr. Sawin explained previously and will provide some additional detail this evening as to that phasing plan. The proposed conditions in the city staff report require, within a time certain restoration should phase 2 not commence prior to the expiration of the land use permit. The project is accurately described and the phasing plan, as required by the city code, is detailed in the record. Next, turning to comments regarding compatibility. Case law in our state tells us that courts look to zoning determinations and designations, adopted code requirements, project conditions, and project modifications that exceed code requirements as all supporting compatibility. The facts and the evidence here more than support that compatibility determination. As a starting point, the 2020 rezone decision for this property included a thorough compatibility review of the uses permitted in the CFF zone, including the various components of this project in relation to the adjacent zoning districts. That decision, which was upheld on appeal, is evidence in itself of compatibility of a project like this, which is designed to meet the CFF zoning regulations. In addition, IMC 18.06.090, with regard to the CFF zone, identifies the primary purpose of the zone to provide for public uses on publicly owned properties, and it encourages multiple public uses on CFF zoned property. That provision of the code goes further to state that the CFF zone and its applicable regulations are designed to, quote, ensure compatibility. As shown in the record, this project not only complies with the applicable zoning regulations, but with the project conditions and the project design itself, it goes significantly further to ensure compatibility. The record is replete with evidence and detail of how this project is designed to both functionally and operationally exceed code requirements. I won't list all of those measures. They are all in the record, but they generally include, among others, deliberate building orientation, extraordinary buffers and added vegetation, scaled back programming and facilities from those same things that are found at other district schools, and a design that uses only 51% of the permitted 90% impervious surface permitted in this zone by the code. The district voluntarily and in response to numerous public comments heard in various forums throughout this very lengthy planning process has given up substantial development rights and educational programming in order to assure compatibility. The final piece that I will touch on tonight responds to a letter that you recently received from the attorney from the Providence Point Umbrella Association. And bear with me just a bit because we're going to dive a little bit into case law, but I'll try to break it down in a way that doesn't go too dense. But in that letter, the PPUA attorney asserted that the district is increasing or altering drainage flow onto PPUA's property and that the city will be liable as a result. That submittal is both legally and factually incorrect. The case cited in the letter, Phillips v. King County, stands for the proposition that water cannot be collected and deposited onto adjacent land in a manner different than before development. If it is, the adjacent property owner may be entitled to damages. Importantly, the focus is on whether circumstances change and harm is caused on the adjacent property. It is not focused on changes made to how stormwater is collected and concentrated on the property under development. The letter from PPUA misses that very important distinction. As Mr. Sawin will address, the stormwater design for this project will maintain the same drainage paths and will not increase existing dispersion rates. Although the district is appropriately updating stormwater collection on the project site, no changes will be made to how water is collected and deposited on PPUA's property. In fact, conditions are expected to improve. Mr. Sawin will also explain how and why the letter's description of the stormwater design is inaccurate. Because the drainage pattern will remain the same and there is no harm, Phillips is inapplicable. The assertion in the letter that the city will somehow be liable is also not supported by the Phillips decision. In Phillips, the court confirmed that a municipality's approval of a private development or its acceptance of ownership of a drainage system does not in itself give rise to liability. Instead, for liability to arise, some conduct of the municipality must be the direct and proximate cause of any harm caused to adjacent land. Phillips and the related cases focus on whether the municipality owns the land on which the drainage system is being improved, not the property that is allegedly being harmed. Even if PPUA were able to somehow demonstrate damages here, which Mr. Sawin will explain is not possible, there is no basis on which the city could be liable because its only involvement is to approve the district's drainage system on the district's property through the permitting process. And the city does not own the project site, nor is it offering its own property for construction of the new facilities. At this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to the district's architect, Jordan Keel.
Thank you, Denise. Good evening, everyone. I believe you heard from my business partner, Michael Davis, on the March 2nd meeting. He's the design principal on this project, and I'm the managing principal for Bassetti Architects. So at the last meeting on the 3rd, we saw a series of renderings that were presented, which did not accurately reflect all of the efforts the design team and the school district have put into being a good neighbor to Providence Point through buffering views and creating a compatible design. The design team has a similar set of renderings we'd like to share with you here today in order to clarify the anticipated views from Providence Point. So starting here, this is a snippet from the presentation we saw in the 3rd by Joshua Cohen of Fat Pencil Studios. I believe that was the name. And this is an aerial view showing the site prior to the demolition of the church building. Go to the next slide, please. And this was the next slide that he showed, showing an aerial rendering which fails to show any of the new trees we're proposing on the project. And it's worth noting that because there's over 900 new trees being proposed on this project. I'd like to draw special attention to the area, and Todd, I'm going to ask you to try to wave your mouse around if you can, along the south there, right there, along that edge. There's a whole bunch of trees being proposed. The the western corner of the site, the most western, there's a pocket of trees there that's missing from this rendering. The entire interior of the site, every tree on the interior of the site that we're proposing is missing, as well as, I mean, it's really all the new trees, but this is where the bulk of them are. And then in the outfield of the softball field. Let's go to the next rendering. So this rendering really focuses on just the south end of the site. The next one will show you the north end. But here you can see the trees there that show up that we're proposing along the southern edge, as well as many trees on the interior. And then this rendering sort of fades because it's such a large site, and it's sort of the field of depth of view is faded out. So let's go to the next slide to see the other end of the site. And so this is looking from the northeast corner of the site, and it shows new trees along the road throughout the interior of the site, as well as the cluster of new trees at the outfield of the softball field. It's an area of the site where there's currently no buffer between Providence Point and the existing access road. These trees will add a significant visual buffer to the north edge of the site. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then over time, these trees will grow and create an even more significant tree canopy across the site. This will be a really lush and beautiful site. Go to the next slide. So this was a view provided by Fat Pencil that is located in a spot by the softball field outfield. So this is a view on the north edge of the site looking south. And it almost appears as if the camera position is within the property boundaries. Let's go to the next slide. And here's the same view as accurately depicted with the improvements and the initial site vegetation, but pulled back a bit so that the observer is on the Providence Point property and the new trees are shown. So the next one. And then down the road in maybe 10, 15 years, the trees will grow up and be even more of a more significant barrier, as you see here. Let's go to the next slide, please. There appears to be a 5-story building in this location. And so for this particular view, we took the opportunity to pull the camera up approximately 50 feet and look in that same direction. And in this view, I'd like to point out the roof of the grandstands. And this is one you'll really need to point to there, Todd. The trees obscuring it are actually a stand of existing trees. Just has to do with the angle you're looking at. As you can see, it does not have a large visual impact. The grandstands are a good deal shorter than typical grandstands at other high schools. Both Skyline and Liberty have grandstand structures that are around 55 feet tall. These grandstands are longer as they extend along the side of the track and field, which allows them to be shorter. And they're only about 34 feet tall, even though the code will allow us to go up to 65 feet tall. We've also added walls to the back and sides of the grandstands in order to redirect the unregulated noise of fans away from Providence Point. Last, I would like to point out that the scoreboard, which sits at the north end of the football field, is not visible. And that scoreboard is also at a height of just under 28 feet, much lower than the code's permitted 65 feet. Go to the next slide. Moving further west, this is another view provided by Fat Pencil. The view angle appears to be from a drone. Definitely not a ground level view. And to my knowledge, there's not a 5-story building in this location. The next slide. Down on the ground, the view is mostly of Providence Point garages, which lines portions of the northern property line and nearly all of the western property line. Go to the next slide. Another view by Fat Pencil shown from a drone and without any of the new trees. We're looking east from the western property line. And notice that building kind of right in the center. Go to the next slide. So I've actually omitted the building in this view because it would obscure so much of the view of what you're trying to see here. So what you can see is the footprint of the building that I pointed out in the last slide. So from this vantage point, you would really pretty much just be seeing the Providence Point's own buildings. But if that were not there, you're seeing all of the new trees that we're proposing along that edge. Let's go to the next slide. And as the new trees grow, the view of the school is nearly completely obscured. The next one. And a view by Fat Pencil, again from a drone and without any of the new trees shown. We're looking north from the southwestern corner of the property. The next one. Here's that same view from the ground and including the new trees that we're proposing to plant. The glimpse of the school that you're getting here is actually looking down a small access road that's on the site. But to get this view requires the near perfect alignment with that access road that we have in this view. If you were to step any too much to the right or left here, you wouldn't get this head-on view and you would see even less of the building. The next slide. shows that as the trees grow larger and become more mature along that southwestern edge, the buffer becomes even more opaque. So those are the views we wanted to share with you today. Now I'd like to switch to speaking a little bit about site security. And Todd, I wonder if you could bring up the fencing diagram. The report provided by Providence Point refers to CEPTED multiple times. And I design schools for a living, and CEPTED principles are used to guide the design of every single site we work on. Usually we're focused on applying those principles to keeping students safe, but there's no conflict in looking through the lens of keeping neighbors safe as well. CEPTED is not about isolating individual sites with walls, it's about creating safe communities. The suggestion that we create an 8-foot opaque wall, as noted in the security report, is a direct contradiction to CEPTED principles and contrary to all the efforts we've put into creating a visually pleasing vegetated buffer. This is the site plan with the new and existing fences highlighted. Oh, this is not the site plan with the, do you have the one that has the red and the green fence lines highlighted?
I don't.
Oh,
Find it.
missed that. Okay. Essentially what you'll see when this comes up is that the existing fence along the property line is being retained. And then we have these expansive vegetative buffers. And then additional, oh, here we go. So the green line around the perimeter here is the existing fence, which will remain. And then we have an additional fence that is 12 foot tall on the school side of that buffer that is shown in red, continuing all along. So we're confident that this fencing will create clear sight lines for students' safety and act in concert with the site design to create a logical internal boundaries. As you can see, all foot and vehicle traffic is clearly directed to 228th versus a suggestion by the PPUA consultant of students filtering through Providence Point and on their way home from school and getting into trouble or doing untoward things in the neighborhood. That's simply just not the condition that we're creating on this site. So in summary, we've gone to great lengths here to be responsive to the concerns of the neighbors and to come up with a compatible design solution. And we're really proud of this design and feel that it's meeting all of the needs and concerns that we've heard so far. So thank you. I'll hand it off to Adam Jenkins now to speak a little bit about sound.
Thank you, Jordan. So nice to see you all again. My name is Adam Jenkins. We spoke last time about noise, and I work at the Greenbush Group, and we conducted a noise study for the subject project, and I'm here to follow up on some of the comments that were brought up at the hearing last time, and also address some other items. I understand that our written comment responses were provided to the commission prior to this meeting. So as applicant's counsel mentioned before, I'm not going to read them to you, but I will attempt to summarize what I believe are the most important points of those written responses. Regarding Commissioner Sanford's questions, there are some additional details that I believe are worth pointing out. He asked specifically about the maximum loudspeaker output power, which we addressed, and also provide additional details in the responses. But I also did want to add reference to the city staff condition number 39 that requires the district to conduct noise monitoring to ensure that the PA system does not exceed the noise level limits at adjacent property boundaries. And then also SEPA MDNS condition number 38 that requires the sound system to be turned off by 10 p.m. when the noise limits are reduced by 10 decibels to account for increased sensitivity in the community from noise generated during nighttime hours. A member of the community, Timothy Brown, also raised concerns about noise that are addressed in our written responses. But there are 4 points that I would like to specifically mention with you this evening. Mr. Brown expressed concerns that existing noise levels near the site at this time exceed thresholds identified in WAC 173-60. However, it's important to remember and to keep in mind that the traffic on public roadways, such as 228th, is not regulated by that chapter. Only noise generated by activities on the project site are subject to WAC 173-60. Therefore, a comparison of public traffic on public roadways to these environmental noise limits in WAC 173-60 is just not appropriate. It can confuse an appropriate assessment of potential noise effects from a project such as this. Mr. Brown also expressed concern about a lack of assessment of an increase to existing conditions based on the baseline sound levels that we measured at the site and our predicted noise emissions from site activities. I appreciated this comment, and in response to that comment, we've provided the commission with that information. That information shows not more than a 6 decibel increase, worst case, during daytime hours, and not more than 2 decibel increase, worst case, during nighttime hours. And these are well below the typical threshold of 10 decibels, which would be considered a threshold for substantial increase in terms of noise effects. So that information was quantified in the table, and I appreciate Mr. Brown asking that question. Mr. Brown also expressed concern about there not being any analysis done for traffic on public roadways. And aside from the exemption that we've been talking about as far as traffic on public roadways, I did want to respond to this question specifically with some math and with some technical answers. Simply, noise emissions from vehicles on roads are much more sensitive to changes in speed than they are flow. So a doubling of flow or vehicles per hour on a roadway would typically increase emissions by 6 decibels. Doubling the travel speed on a public roadway would increase by 6 decibels for the same flow. So when we're looking at increasing flow during peak hour conditions in the morning, when this project is expected to generate its most trips, in addition to the existing traffic, the fact that there will be a school zone in place with a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, which is half of what current posted speed is on the site, is expected to result in a net decrease of traffic noise received at Providence Point, ignoring the addition of on-site structures and additional screening that will be afforded by the project. And the removal of trees or shrubbery or foliage is inconsequential compared to this type of effect that we're looking at based on just the reduction of travel speed alone. Mr. Brown also expressed concern about the noise study not quantifying off-site noise emissions from on-site traffic during sporting events. And in response to that, we did provide some numbers in our written comments. It's important to note, though, that the expected trip generation during a sporting event is about half of what it would expect to be, what it is expected to be during peak morning trip generation from the schools. Therefore, it's possible to predict those sound levels, but there will be less than what we've already presented in the noise analysis, which really represents a worst case situation for noise emissions from on-site traffic activities. So I hope that the responses are helpful to the commission in considering these elements of the project, and I would be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have related to noise.
Thank you, Adam. So this is Todd Solomon with HBL. I spoke last time. I'm a civil engineer. So I have a number of pieces we're going to talk through. So we talked last time. I'm going to put up a few slides you've seen before, a few new information. Most of this was provided in writing as part of our written responses. Denise mentioned, so I'm going to start with site access. I'm going to talk about the easement on the south portion of the site. So to date, we've been talking about a reciprocal easement that provides access along that south property line. Based on some comments from the neighbors, we dug into this significantly. We actually found that an old deed from 1979, turns out old information from the 70s wasn't really, really well scanned. So we haven't been able to find every piece of it as easy as would have been desired. This document was before any of the Providence Point development happened and before any of the property was sold to the underlying developer. So they created the reciprocal easement we've been mentioning to date in January of 1979. In December of 1979, they sold the property, and as a condition of the sale of the property, made the underlying easement go away. So based on the information we have today, we don't believe there's an underlying easement for the easement we've been pointing to is not valid. So here's our survey of the site, which does show the easement, which we now believe does not exist. The underlying property owner, so they owned all of this property at the time when they made this go away. They moved portions of the road. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this slide so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to try to. So they adjusted the road around the north end of the property, around the north end of the road, to make sure the road was completely within the church property along this side. On the south side, they didn't do that. They left the road in place, leaving the property line to go down the center of the road. We believe there was an easement put in at the time of that sale to, so this property was sold to Hilltop. And during that sale, we believe there was an easement created. We have not been able to come up with a copy of said easement, and tracing down the deed has been challenging. This is a copy of the Hilltop Village condo map. You can see they have the access road in question shown and show access to it, which is why we believe that there is an underlying easement that we just haven't been able to find yet. This map is from, it's a historical map that shows the access road and the college in place. You can see this is the area that was sold to that Hilltop Village. The road is already in place. So we believe there's access rights to that. The timing of this, we understand, is completely unfortunate of us not being able to find this information out until recently. So we'd like to propose a condition on ourselves as part of the project that would either we come up with the agreement, the underlying deed for that easement as option one. Option two would be we provide a new easement with the neighbors to work that out. If we can't come to agreement on those two options, the third would be to move the access road for the school for the school portion of the access. So just this southern piece here, move that entirely onto the school district property so we do not impact the Providence Point property. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the elementary school phasing. The last time I talked a little bit about the idea that we needed to fill this site in order to help with earthwork and the economics of the construction. I definitely missed a lot of other reasons why we need to fill the elementary site, so I want to talk through some of those pieces. I know the text I'm about to put up on the next few slides is not something you're going to be able to read, but so this dotted line is where we propose to build the high school improvements to. So as part of the elementary school site, we need to build the sewer and water loops out to the Providence Point system as required to serve our site. So we have a sewer that's currently stubbed and a water system that we need to run through our site to meet the high school site and ultimately make the whole community have a little bit better system. The yellow area is where we believe we will need to clear, fill, and grade in order to make these improvements work. The new road is also elevated above the existing conditions. So there needs to be a fill slope behind that road to meet existing grades. So the yellow along the back here, you would also see we would need to clear and grade as part of this project. Finally, the storm system within the elementary school area serves area outside of the elementary school. So we still need a storm system for the remainder of this upstream drainage. And as we'll talk about in a few minutes on the stormwater system, where you might remember from last time, that we're taking a significant amount of our water out to 228th, trying to take water around the Providence Point system. This pond is needed to do that, and this pond needs to be elevated to allow that to happen. So building the retaining walls for this portion to allow that new pond to be constructed in elevation to allow it to gravity discharge out to 228 is necessary. So as you can see, a significant amount of the trees within the elementary school area would need to be cut down as part of the project without the elementary school included. And obviously, as being good stewards of the land, we want to make sure that we're in a position we can build this elementary school. And as we talked about last time, the master plan approval process allows that phasing to happen as outlined by the staff. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the downstream analysis and stormwater. So we've heard a lot about discharging to the neighbors and changing those discharge points. And it's something that we've worked with the city for coming up on 3 years now of trying to make sure that we had a really good storm system that met all the requirements. So meeting the city's municipal code, making sure that we're being good neighbors, we're not going to cause adverse impacts. You heard Denise talk about the case law pieces of making sure that that we're not causing downstream impacts to those neighbors. Something I'm personally very vested in for a number of reasons. One, I'm a professional engineer licensed in the state of Washington, as well as a whole bunch of other places. But also I own a firm that's doing the design of this. And from a legal standpoint, the liability that the city doesn't have, I do hold. So really vested in making sure that this is the right property and we have the right system in place to make that work. The next thing I'm going to show, this is a historic basin map from Providence Point's as-built drawings. And so from this, you'll see this dotted line here is the district boundary of our site. And there's approximately 23 acres in this. There's a little exhibit off to the side. There's 23 acres that they accounted for as upstream drainage in the Providence Point design and construction. So they assumed that there was portions of the existing access road that drained to Providence Point. There's a significant amount of forest that drained to Providence Point. All of those areas were included in the original analysis for the development of their stormwater system. This is a map I brought up last time, and it's the historical basin map for where water drains from our site. This is a complicated site from a drainage perspective. It drains to lots of different areas. You'll see we've broken this down. The darker blue is impervious surface. The lighter is either forested or landscaped conditions. So large area drains out to, there's an existing catch basin on the property line here that this drains out to. There's some smaller basins that sheet flow directly to the neighbors. There's a larger area here that makes its way out to a culvert on the property line that we'll talk about in a minute. And then the majority of the college site that drained in this basin didn't drain directly out to 228th or to the north. Was actually through a system down right here. And there's a piped outfall directly to that. As part of our proposed system, we have attempted to match that to the maximum extent feasible. And what I mean by that is, so all of the buffer area that we're not grading, obviously really easy not to change drainage paths from that. We have some area above, so this area, lower area of the elementary school, and the parking lot for the elementary school, that getting around the Providence Point system is not practical. It naturally drains that way, and based on the elevations, there's not another place to take the downstream. So we reviewed our options, and there's a catch basin I mentioned on the property line that we're proposing to connect to, and that is where the natural drainage went based on the basin maps that I provided a moment ago. And then the lower portion of the elementary school is going to discharge to a culvert, which was also built as part of the Providence Point system and stubbed onto our property. As Jordan mentioned, there's buildings that line the majority of our property line in this downstream path. And you can see from this photo that while I believe there's positive drainage around this building, discharging water at this location and allowing it to sheet flow across the property line is not going to ensure that there will not be any downstream impacts. And this, from this photo and this site visit, is when we decided we needed to find a way to directly connect to the stormwater system. It should also be noted that if you did discharge water at this property line and it ran across the parking and over the curb out to this system, it would ultimately make it to the same conveyance system that we're proposing to connect to, approximately 200 feet upstream. So from last time, we have a number of systems on our site. We have a lower detention system from the elementary school that we're connecting directly to a piped connection. We have the elementary school discharge to that catch basin I've mentioned. And then the red areas we're taking out to 228, trying to get them around the Providence Point system because we're able to do that. Well, in the existing condition, it drains through Providence Point's system and ultimately makes it to the same discharge location. The green makes it to the north and out to the Sammamish downstream we discussed last time. Wanted to talk about the downstream and potential erosion a little bit. And this is the slide from last time. So in the historical condition, and by historical I mean when the college was constructed prior to Providence Point's construction, we had an existing outfall. And this outfall is provided in this column. It's also this blue line here. And this is just going to be peak volumes from specific runoff events. So the next piece, going back to forested condition, which is what we're required to do by code, you'll see this is what we'd be allowed to discharge at. And then in the developed condition, we actually reduce that farther by creating detention systems. So if you imagine having a fire hose and running the fire hose down a gravel driveway, you're going to push rocks and sediment out of the way. And then if you imagine having a giant tank to hold that volume of water in the tank and having a garden hose release, it would have no problem from a pushing rocks out of the way in those pieces, which would be the erosion side of it, but it would run for a long time. And that's really the idea behind detention design and what we're trying to do with our site. So as a result of this, the peak discharges from the historical site are going to see approximately 75% reduction in those peak flows. And they're going to have a reduction in what's allowable of between 14 and 40%, depending on which individual event we look at. And so this graph, we have the blue is the historical, the orange is what's allowed by code, and this gray is what we're actually proposing to do as part of our site. So that was a very simplified version of the way the stormwater works. And I think we had some questions last time that we didn't quite answer about the duration modeling and what that really looks like. So this is a image out of the stormwater Western Washington hydraulic model that we actually use to design stormwater systems for detention in Western Washington. So the blue line is the pre-developed discharge from the site, and the red is what we're proposing to discharge. And this is based on a series, so it literally takes 50 years of stormwater event in 15-minute time steps, runs it, and then you compare your pre-developed amount of times you pass this specific flow to the developed condition. And as you can see, we have a net reduction in our system. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the wetland B hydrology a little bit. So we've heard that we're going to dry up wetland B as a part of this project. So in the existing condition, this is an image from the survey. The existing loop road comes up around our site. That road is crowned. So I think everyone's probably seen a crowned road. Water drains to each side of the road. And there's a roadside ditch on the upstream side of it. That ditch flows down to a culvert, to another ditch, and down to a storm facility that discharges from the site. The wetland is approximately right here. So the only area that's actually tributary to the wetland that is not forested conditions is approximately 10 feet of asphalt, the length of this portion. So there's not a whole bunch of upstream drainage that makes it to wetland B. And as a result, we're not changing the hydrology of that wetland. The other thing we heard is about water getting to the trees, and we're going to dry up the buffer. Again, our site has a significant loop road that goes around it. Other than this portion along the Providence Point area, the majority of it's crowned, which is going to limit the water that makes it out of that area. There's ditches along the edge to capture runoff in the existing condition and make its way out to 228. The yellow in this exhibit is what actually makes it discharges to the trees. So you can see it's a relatively small area that was actually dispersed to those trees. I think we're discharging our wall drains and some other small features to the buffer. We're really trying to capture that water and maintain it on site and discharge it as discussed a couple of slides ago. So the trees are not going to see a reduction in the amount of water they get, because really what they get right now is what falls on them. And that will not change as part of this buffer or this plan. The next thing we've heard a lot about is landslide hazards and not doing enough study of the area. The landslide information is provided in the record. We talked about it a little bit last time, but I thought this map does a really good job of showing how much study is actually being done on this site. Every one of these dots is either an exploration pit or a boring that was done as part of this project. So you can see this site has had significantly more analysis done from a geotechnical perspective and from an environmental perspective than most developments would have. I mean, normally we would get 15 on a 40-acre site, maybe, and this has had significantly north of that. The next piece I want to talk about, the lead study under the water tower. So this is a map that is out of the lead information that was provided. It's where the 12 inches of strippings came from. You can see for such a small area, every one of those red dots is testing that was done. The black dots are testing. The red is additional scanning that was done on top of it. For such a small area, it's quite a bit of information. You can see from the actual data that there's no point where we had lead below the 12-inch mark. So I think last time I mentioned that, you know, we're going to strip 12 inches, we're going to go test. And that is something we're going to do. The reason we're going to do that is because there's no amount of testing we can do to be 100% certain that there's not one spot where it will be beyond the 12-inch mark. That being said, we do believe that 12 inches will collect 100% of the lead contamination under the water tank. And we do believe that is sufficient to meet those requirements. So I'm going to turn it over to Marnie Efron to talk about the traffic.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm last up tonight, and I'm going to be pretty short and sweet. I also have a set of rebuttal comments that have come back as Exhibit C. We've also attached 2 pieces of supplemental information that were part of the SEPA record and have been performed in coordination and for the city of Sammamish related to traffic and transportation. Those have been attached to my memoranda as Exhibit C1 and C2. And I'll talk briefly about those in my comments here. One of the main issues raised by the PPUA is that there has not been a full construction plan submitted for the improvements along 228th. That is not true. There was a set of plans for 228 submitted to the city of Sammamish in November of last year. And as Ms. Stiffarm said at the opening of that, it's very rare that that level of detail gets actually submitted or even prepared at this stage of an entitlement process. And so, but this is such a big feature and it's a pretty big cost feature that we have been working on it for some time. Want to go to the level of detail that we have been working on these plans. The concept for what we will be building along 228 has been known for more than a year. It was in our original traffic study and then updated as part of our traffic study in February of 2021. There were two pieces of supplemental information that was prepared for the city of Sammamish to really refine our concept plans to the level of understanding the length of turn pockets that we need and how that improvement could tie north and south in terms of getting down to 43rd and the new improvements that the city of Issaquah has just made near Providence Point, and then how it would transition back to 40th. So we have had many meetings with City of Sammamish staff and its consultants to discuss those details. They are all reflected in that new set of plans. I want to respond directly to a couple of comments that have been raised by Roth Tillman of the PPUA, who is representing the PPUA. One is related to the site location itself and its remote location, and his contention, and I quote, that these schools will depend entirely on auto access and that they won't reduce the vehicle miles of travel. Both of those contentions are false. These sites, both the high school site and the elementary school students, will have a very high percentage of people who take yellow school bus transportation. So yes, they're located far away from Metro Transit, but that's not how students get to school. It's with a yellow school bus. In working with the district, we expect that about 50% of all the elementary school students and 40% of the high school students could commute to these sites by yellow school bus. In addition, we anticipate that there will be some walking, particularly from the Sammamish Highlands and from areas north of the site. The plans that have been put forth go well above and beyond what would be typical of a frontage improvement. The school district will be building sidewalks on both sides of the street. So there's an entire sidewalk along the western side of 228th, and then from the driveway north, it will also be constructing the sidewalk between the site driveway on 40th, and that's specific to providing for pedestrian access to the school. This segment of roadway will also have bicycle lanes on both sides and both directions on 228, and there will be bicycle crossings as well as a bike walkway that extends onto the site for students and staff to use. Also want to talk about the vehicle miles traveled. We heard from others at the last hearing about school trips are not discretionary. The school district attracts the students. They have to provide a place for these students. If this school is not developed with a new elementary and a new high school, those students will be assigned to other schools in the district, and they'll drive further or be transported further away from their homes than they would be if these new schools are built. It will actually reduce the miles traveled in the district and reduce congestion around your other schools. Finally, I want to talk about the transportation management plan and the contention that it needs to be completed now. We have prepared many transportation management plans for not only a lot of different schools that have been developed, but also for some of the biggest businesses in the Pacific Northwest, everything from Amazon to Google, Expedia. Those transportation management plans are always prepared later in the process as more refinements are made in terms of the behaviors of different students. For schools in particular, those TMPs require some input from the school principal, who hasn't yet been determined. What we do know, and what the city of Issaquah's conditions set forth, is the framework around what we will be measuring for as we set forth those TMPs. Those are really contained in condition 1, which is the monitoring plans. And for the transportation related elements, we anticipate that we will be monitoring the number of trips that are entering and exiting this school and comparing those to what we've evaluated as part of all of our analyses. We'll be looking at the operations of the site driveway and making sure that it continues to meet the City of Sammamish standards for operations. We would be reviewing the queue lengths, making sure that they don't extend beyond the lane capacity, and then in the load and unload areas, that those queues don't extend back and start blocking other operations. We're also looking at making sure that all of the parking is contained on these sites, and that during events, we don't have overspill parking to any of the neighborhood streets. So that gives a framework, and it's already set forth of what the measures that we will be targeting as part of that transportation management plan, and that then there will be post-opening monitoring to make sure that we meet those thresholds. Back to Todd.
Thank you, Marnie. I want to thank the Development Commission for listening to our presentation and working with us through this process. Yeah, I want to point back to the written materials we provided. There's a lot in this record. We're happy to answer any questions you have, but really appreciate your time and look forward to a really successful project.
Thank you, Mr. Salwin, and the entire school district applicant team. So this is an opportunity for the commission to ask questions of the applicant. So if you have a question, use the chat feature and just type question in there, or put a Q in there, and I'll know that you have a question. Commissioner Dillon.
Thank you. Patty Dillon, and I have a question for Mr. Sawin about the elementary school phasing. And I'm looking at the figure that you had up showing the areas that would need to be modified associated with the high school construction. And just wanting to clarify whether the clearing and grading that would occur as part of phase 1 would be limited essentially to those shaded areas, or whether it would be the entire elementary school site.
So our proposal is the entire elementary school site out to including the retaining walls and then doing the buffer improvements. We really feel like the buffer improvements are going to help visually from the neighbors' point of view when that elementary school gets built. Getting those constructed now will help them grow prior to the future. If the elementary school was not built and we didn't clear the area now and we hauled that 20,000 yards of dirt off-site, that's the area we would need to clear to build construction. So if somehow that got removed from the project was what I was trying to show with that exhibit.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Chair Brennan. Question for Ms. Heffron. You might have mentioned this and I missed it, and I can't tell from the maps. Will the sidewalk, the new sidewalk on 228th, connect to the new sidewalk that has been installed as part of the Southeast 43rd interchange?
Yes.
Okay, that'll all be continuous then.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And then I had another question for Mr. Keel, I think. If it's possible to pull up the map with the fencing on it again. And my question was, it sounded like, Mr. Keel, that you said the fencing that was all shown in red would all be 12-foot high fencing. And is
Correct.
that, so is that a change from the project plan that we've seen then?
Todd, am I incorrect in that that's 12 feet? I was pretty sure it was when we talked.
Yeah, it's a problem of me taking a different exhibit and highlighting over the top of it. So, the outfield fences for the baseball are 12 feet, so this portion would be 12 feet. The portion along the elementary school wall is 6 feet.
I thought that might be 4 feet along there is it the,
That green
kind of
dot. You're
yellowish
correct. You're
color, I
correct.
believe?
Yeah, so it's so we're 6 foot here, we're 4 foot along this walking path where that really dark black line is.
Okay.
Then we're, let me look and make sure.
Thanks for asking this question. That's good to get this clear.
Yeah, and then we're 8 feet along the elementary school playground area. And then we're 4 feet to keep people from falling off into the wetland. There.
So, excuse me, but I thought, you can move that red line off, and when I looked at the plans, up at the north end of the football field, it looks to me like that, yeah, the sort of that golden between the green dash line and the softball field right there.
Mhm.
I thought that color lined up with a 4-foot high black vinyl chain link fence, not a 6-foot.
You're correct.
Is it possible to make that a taller fence than just 4 feet? So it
Yeah,
doesn't seem
our-
too much of a fence?
Yeah, our intent was, you're gonna be on, like, walking on a sidewalk next to this fence. And so trying to keep the scale of it down was kind of the intent a little bit, but I mean, if you guys wanted that to be a 6-foot fence, I don't think that's a problem from a district standpoint.
Okay, and then one other fence question, down at the very south end, where the fence ends sort of in the middle of yeah, right there. I was curious why it ended there and did not extend down to the new access road.
So there's a pretty good cluster of trees here, and so tying that fence into those trees was kind of the thought. There's not intended to be a lot of students. They're gonna get off the bus and come into the school. And so from a security standpoint, it didn't feel like there was a need for fencing there. Obviously, this is a fairly preliminary fencing diagram, so we will be refining that as part of construction.
Okay, it just seemed to me there's an outside plaza there on the backside of the school, and wondering if that fence can be extended to the access road. It might just sort of, not through the trees, but along the
edge there,
or
so
the parking areas, just as sort of a way to,
something like that.
a visual barrier. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there other questions from the commission or the applicant? I want to go back to, I'll ask one real quick then. The access road and the easement. I'll be honest, I got a little confused in there about, and then you were suggesting an additional condition. So can you pull that back up and maybe walk us through it again? And the elements that you talked about within the options, I guess, that you talked about were, coming up with the original easement documentation to show what you assumed was the appropriate alignment of that roadway, which was historically shown on some of these documents that you provided and photographs. The other option was to come to an agreement with the neighboring property owners at Providence Point And then the third option was to move the road onto the high school site. So I'm guessing you've already done fairly exhaustive research, so you may not be able to accomplish number one. Providence Point obviously could be a protracted negotiation. I don't know for sure, but so then the last option would be realigning the road. And my concern is, can you accomplish that on the property and still meet the conditions, does it have an effect, a negative effect on the ability to comply with the city code standards and the buffers that we're trying to accomplish here? So if you could maybe spend a few minutes walking us through, and specifically on that last option, if that's where you need to go, since it hasn't been fully explored here, how would you accomplish that?
Yeah, so maybe to back up just a tiny bit from the last option first. So we did the news of, so this deed that showed that this has been removed is something we got this afternoon, honestly. So we've been doing some pretty exhaustive research with Chicago Title, but it's something that they did not have in their original title report. And so I do believe we're going to find the underlying easement. I have a hard time believing that the underlying church or the college sold that property without the existing road, being allowed to be there. So I think there's a pretty good likelihood we're going to find that in the next few days. If we don't, and we do have to go down the path of rebuilding that. My thought is, and if we go from this site survey and see if I can zoom in. Sorry, this wonderful presentation mode makes it relatively difficult to actually. See if this works. Okay. Here we go. So the access road is not exactly on the property line. So my thought is we would leave the portion of the access road on the neighbor's property. Obviously, if we don't have rights to it, we're not going to touch it. We would add asphalt on our portion of the road in order to get a 20-foot wide access to our site. So right here, there's only about 6 feet of the existing access that's on the Providence Point side of the property line. So we would add a little bit here. It would definitely take some retaining wall. But that area was previously cleared. There's actually a sign and some things that sit kind of on this hillside and a light. So there's no trees. So I think we could pretty easily do that, add to get away from 228th, and then same idea, add, it's somewhere between 8 and 12 feet of new impervious asphalt to create that road that would go up. And it's something I think we completely do without impacting trees and buffers and all the things we've talked about as part of this project. I don't think it adversely changes our proposed development that we've submitted for or causes any other issues, specifically because that road is going to be used for emergency vehicle access only. The district isn't proposing to have vehicles on it as part of their project.
Okay. So what you're saying is you're confident you could accomplish the widening without impacting, materially impacting the project and or meeting the standards that we're trying to achieve here.
Yes, I 100% believe that is true.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Arcata.
Thank you, Chair Brennan. This is Johnny. I have a question that may be premature, but there's been a lot of discussion about trees and buffer zones. Has there been any consideration for an establishment period for construction? In other words, the plant trees, and then if there's any failing trees after a certain period of time, they're replaced. And that may help with some of the consideration for trees.
Yeah, there has been. We've got a condition that's part of the Issaquah Municipal Code that we're going to plant trees and we're going to monitor them for 3 years. The other thing I missed pointing out is we're going to provide irrigation on those trees. So we need temporary irrigation of those trees, including what what we're providing in the buffer to make sure that they get established and we end up with the beautiful graphics that Jordan provided of making sure this looks the way we intend it to. I think we all want that buffer to grow as quickly as possible and create this forest-like atmosphere for the students and for the neighbors.
And a different question. This is during construction, you're gonna have a large excavation for your stormwater retention at the ball field. I assume that there'll be multiple stages of construction stormwater control that'll occur that'll mitigate, turbidity, silt, any contaminations.
Yeah, we will definitely have, so we'll have an NPDS permit, so an erosion permit with the state of Washington that will monitor discharge and all those pieces and make sure we're not causing, allowing turbid water to leave our site. That's part of the construction process, and a permit we will be obtaining as part of construction. The facility you mentioned specifically under the baseball field is actually a fill. So we fill under the baseball field and we build that system as part of that. We're still going to have big excavators and other things on the site. Just that specific one is in a fill condition. It actually works out pretty well because we can build kind of a dam in the outfield and use some areas of that to be able to capture stormwater and ensure that we're meeting all the requirements of the city and the state. And the good part about this project, it is design build. We've got a contractor already on site. They've been, in significant conversations of what's the right way to deal with stormwater. Are we going to pump from this portion? Are we doing it all with gravity? Are we doing it with Baker tanks? And like I mentioned, it's a big site. Part of that is not clearing it all day one. So going in there and saying, hey, in the next 3 months, while it's dry, I'm going to be able to work this amount of area. We're going to cut the trees down from that area and remove vegetation from that area and not go outside of that. What we wouldn't want to do is get a permit later this summer, go and clear the entire area that we're going to build in and create a giant muddy mess. That's not going to be good for the neighbors. That's not going to be good for us. That's really not going to be good for the contractor when ecology shows up to try to convince them to fix it. So being really thoughtful in what we want that to look like ahead of the time, and having them on board has really made that a lot simpler.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the commission for the applicant team at this point? Yeah, I'm seeing no additional questions. I'm going to suggest that we've been at this for almost an hour and a half, that we take about a 10-minute break and then come back and we can hear the rebuttal from the staff, and then an opportunity to ask either the staff or the applicant any additional questions before we begin our deliberation. So why don't we go into recess for 10 minutes until 11 minutes until 8:35, and we'll reconvene then. Thank you. Call the March 16th meeting back to order. It's the opportunity now to proceed with the staff rebuttal. And consultant planner Christina Hayworth is going to provide the staff report, or the staff rebuttal. So Christina.
Hi, just a moment while I get the screen shared. There we go. Let me open. Sorry, 1 second.
There we go.
Okay, are you seeing it as a full screen or?
We're seeing, no, it's not in presentation mode yet. So
Okay.
you can click it.
Are
There
you
you
seeing it
go.
in presentation mode now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your patience. All right, here we are. Continuation from March 3rd, and this is the staff rebuttal for the Issaquah School District project at Providence Heights. Already heard from the applicant, so here we go for staff. So I am going to start, sorry, before I get into it, I'm going to start with just a quick overview of some corrections that we've noted from the staff report. We also have some new attachments to add into the record, and then I'll be giving kind of a high-level overview of some of the material that staff presented in the briefing response memo. I'm going to be wrapping up with some discussion on conditions of approval, and then because the criteria are the basis for any recommendation that you make, I will be going over in a little more detail the criteria for all of the different permits that we're looking at today. All right. So some corrections to the staff report. These are in the errata sheet on page 16 of the briefing response memo, which is a new attachment 107. On page 1, we actually noticed an error in the very last permit number. It was listed as AAS 20-00006. That should be AAS 21-00006. The correction on page 74, that was noted in my previous presentation given on the 2nd, but just for the purpose of presenting a complete list of corrections, I wanted to include it again here. And then we have 2 additional corrections on page 153 in the body text. ISD has since submitted application for right-of-way permits with the city of Sammamish. They provided this file number, and they have also actually received their initial review comments on that application. So that review is in fact underway. And then we also heard from Ms. Heffron last time that an updated transportation technical report was prepared on February, I think it was 16th, 2021. The attachment included as attachment 60, the version included as attachment 60 was the version that was peer reviewed, an earlier version that was peer reviewed. And so just to make sure that we have a full and complete record, we have the peer reviewed version will remain as attachment 60, and this slightly updated transportation technical report from February 2021 is now included in the record as attachment number 109. Okay, new attachments for the record. This list was included in the revised agenda dated March 14th. Everything except attachment 110 was actually also in the agenda that was distributed last Friday. So this includes public comments received during the initial couple of days of this hearing, the city's briefing response memo, some additional public comments received that were forwarded to you, that revised transportation technical report that I already mentioned, and then, the Issaquah School District's rebuttal response received on Monday. Added tonight are these items, attachment number 111, is the reciprocal road easement document. So this was one of the documents actually that Mr. Sowen spoke to, and you received it, I believe, earlier today. He's since also provided some additional information that was part of his presentation. We have some more public comments that were received between the 11th and whenever the record closes on this project. Then the applicant's rebuttal presentation and staff's rebuttal presentation, which are the slides that you're viewing now. So those should all be entered officially into the record as of this point. All right, to go over staff's briefing response memorandum, which is again attachment number 107. So we've structured it to address kind of some big categories of information. So some general clarifications, responses to Development Commissioner questions from March 2nd, then clarification on topics raised during public testimony, then a summary of clarifications and corrections to the staff report and the land use conditions. And then attached to the briefing response memorandum are 3 items. So first, some revised recommended land use conditions. Those begin on page 7 of the briefing response memo document. A reference sheet to compare the public comment form letter that was the basis of many public comments we received to where those topics were addressed within the staff report. So that's just supposed to be a quick and easy reference. And then the staff report errata sheet that summarizes those corrections that I've already gone over. The general clarifications that we provided relate to permit process, enforcement of conditions, and standards for review. So these were some of the big topics that multiple commissioners had some questions or feedback about. And so just to kind of summarize for everyone who is tuning in tonight, the permit process typically starts with the land use entitlement and is followed by construction permits. So land use permits would use documents that are well developed, but still not quite final, so that there's a little bit of flexibility to respond to conditions of approval, material availability, that kind of thing. And then compliance with those conditions of approval and with all of the different applicable development standards is confirmed again during construction permit review. So land use is a higher level general conformance or ability to conform with conditions to standards. And then construction permits are the very specific detailed construction documents that are used in the field to build the project. So it's kind of this 2-phase approach, just to clarify for everyone how permitting typically works and how construction permits respond to the land use entitlement process. The other thing that I wanted to touch on specifically are enforcement. So we've listed 4 of the city's most typical enforcement mechanisms. That includes not issuing a construction permit until compliance is determined. So this is related a little bit to the permit process. We have some conditions that are specifically tied to 1 or more construction permits, and that construction permit would not be issued until compliance with the conditions and applicable development standards is demonstrated in that construction permit document set. Or withholding a certificate of occupancy if something happens in the field, or if one of, for example, our conditions that's tied to certificate of occupancy or temporary certificate of occupancy, we can withhold that certificate until conformance or compliance is demonstrated. The city also has the ability to issue fines and stop work orders, and also to revoke the land use permits, forcing the applicant to go through this process again if they wanted to restart their project. And then as far as standards for review, mitigation, and enforcement, these are typically already codified somewhere in the Issaquah Municipal Code, or perhaps adopted by reference, for example, in the case of the noise standards that we heard about earlier. And so that's just to make it very clear what metric city staff is using to determine performance. The standards that are in place in the code or as specified in different conditions of approval. We provided some information on project lighting requirements, specifically on the 228th Avenue Southeast roadway improvements, tree removal on vacant lots, validity of permits, and how that ties into the phase 2 construction timeline and some project noise requirements. These are things that we addressed at the March 2nd meeting, so I'm going to skip going into detail for them now, but if you do have any questions on them, please ask after my presentation. We also heard a lot of public testimony, and these are all of the different topics that we heard about. We've provided a little bit of information about all of them, including some additional contextual information about CC&Rs and how those are used, about whether or not certain topics were still kind of up for decision making. So for example, SEPA is not within DC's purview. Project funding is not within DC's purview for decision making. We provided a little bit more information about how public comment was treated, both the responsibility for the city to address public comment and responsibility for ISD to address public comment during their SEPA process. So all of this information, again, is in the briefing response memo. If you have questions on anything that we presented, please do ask after my presentation. I did want to provide specifically some additional information about stormwater, just to clarify a couple of points there. So just to kind of add on to some of what you've already heard from the applicant and just make it very clear, the project doesn't include the construction of any new stormwater facilities on city-owned property. All of the new stormwater facilities are on school district property, and the project will discharge, like other development projects happening in the city, into the city's existing stormwater system. So just wanted to be very, very clear about those two pieces of the project design. We also have recommended some changes to conditions of approval, largely in response to feedback from development commissioners. So a lot of the changes that we're suggesting clarify review and enforcement authority or reference a specific code standard. This was related to some questions that we had about how is compliance determined, what is the metric that we're using. So I hope that those changes are clear and helpful. We've also recommended some new conditions in this list of conditions that are part of the briefing response memo. So new condition number 54 is it's a condition that describes the revocation of the land use permit. So this is already an option within the code, but this helps clarify review and enforcement authority again, just very, very clearly and explicitly as it applies to this project. We also have a new condition number 55 in this list, which memorializes the verbal commitment that the applicant made for different vegetation types in the south buffer area. So when he committed to a 40% split between evergreen and deciduous vegetation to ensure year-round screening. We memorialize that as condition number 55. Okay. Since the criteria of approval are the basis for decision-making on your recommendation here tonight, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about staff's process in evaluating the criteria of approval. So there are a lot of different permits happening here. All of them have different approval criteria. Staff in our role as reviewers evaluated compliance of the project with each criterion of approval. So for the site development permit, there are 3 criteria. For the master site plan, there are 13 criteria. And for the different administrative adjustments of standards, it varies, but we'll go through all of them right now. So I'll start with the master site plan. You can refer to the staff report on page 154, or if you're looking at the packet from the 2nd of March. That's bait stamp page number 168. So these are all of the different criteria topics. These are the titles of the criteria. I didn't quite have enough space to include all of the language from each of the criteria. But there are 13 different criteria for approval that cover pretty much everything from high-level planning policy to very specific code compliance issues here. This is also where we start to talk about phasing. So this is the MSP contemplates phasing of a project, and this is where those requirements are explicitly spelled out. It also talks about permitted use compatibility, design continuity within and outside the site, and all of the different information that needs to appear in the plan sets to be able to properly evaluate and make a recommendation on the application. So we reviewed all 13 of these criteria and concluded that as conditioned, the proposal complies with them. We did the same for the SDP. These begin on page 161, or if you're looking at the bait stamped packet, it's PDF page 175. There are 3 criteria for the SDP that talk about compliance with the comprehensive plan, compliance with other applicable code provisions, and then compliance with the design criteria checklist, which is also called the green sheet. We went through all of these criteria as well, determined that the proposal complies with all of them as conditioned. And then the AASs, so here's where we see a lot of variation in the different criteria. The FAR has some very specific criteria that appear in IMC 18.07.480E. So those are the criteria specifically to reduce the FAR for community facilities, public school community facilities projects. This allows reduction only the amount necessary to incorporate operational functions. Their academic curriculum presents a floor for how far that FAR could be reduced, and requires that any reduction fulfills the intent and purpose of the IMC. And then as staff evaluated the proposal against these criteria, found that it does comply as conditioned. AAS 21-00001 is related to tree retention. This one, as we discussed on the 2nd, is a little bit unusual. The applicant is compliant currently as proposed with tree retention requirements without an AAS. But if the Development Commission or City Council determines that in fact an AAS or modification is required, we did evaluate the tree retention modification criteria and found that the application does in fact also comply with those criteria for approval as well. The parking request, shared parking request is AAS 21-00002. And it's subject to 2 sets of criteria. So there's kind of a generic set, and then for different, like all potential parking modifications, and then a different shorter subset for shared parking specifically. And staff evaluated all of these criteria as well, determined that we have adequate documentation, that we've got enough information about the function and use of the site, compliance with the intent of the code, and the ability to retain trees. All of this good stuff we have determined that the proposal complies as conditioned with these criteria of approval. For AAS 21-0005 and 6, so these use the same generic conditions of approval related to consistency, impacts on adjacent uses, and compliance with intent of the code section related to non-motorized transportation facilities. They also have this optional requirement for additional approval criteria. No additional approval criteria were specified by the director during the review process, and I just want to be very clear about that, that these were reviewed just for the first 3 because that 4th one is optional and was not used. As conditioned, the proposal complies with the applicable criteria for both of these requests. This is related to continuous walkways modification on certain portions of their internal access roadways, and then the public street frontage connections along 228. We also, based on the new information related to the reciprocal road easement provided just late this afternoon by the applicant, have an additional land use condition to recommend, land use condition number 56. The language is here. If the Issaquah School District cannot use the easement area for emergency access as proposed in attachment 97, which is the civil plan set, then the district must go through the MSP and SDP amendment processes in IMC 1804.530 and IMC 1804.450 for either a major or minor amendment as determined by the criteria therein. So this would give them the opportunity to complete any necessary research to determine what their use rights are along the reciprocal road easement and the flexibility to relocate that road onto their property if needed. And then whichever amendment type they fall into, if they do need to relocate the road, we can review once that information is available to get a very clear understanding of potential impacts and make a determination about which process is appropriate, whether that's major or minor for that amendment. So as a reminder, based on all of the information provided by the applicant, submitted into the record, all of the analysis presented in the staff report, the briefing response memo, et cetera, the administration does recommend that the Development Commission recommend approval subject to the revised land use conditions in the briefing response memo and the new land use condition number 56 that I just went over. And then just to summarize our next steps as kind of a reminder for where we're at. So right now we're in the midst of the public hearing. After the public hearing, Development Commission will close the public record, conduct their deliberations, make a recommendation to City Council. City Council will deliberate on the project based on the record created at Development Commission using the hearing record, using staff's recommendation and analysis in the staff report, and using Development Commission's recommendation on the project and all of the recommended conditions of approval. And then they will make a decision and issue their notice of action. Once made, the City Council's decision is appealable to King County Superior Court. With that, I will open it up for Q&A. Let me stop sharing my screen. We can talk face to face.
Great, thank you, Mr. Hayward. So commissioners, if you have a question, just type question in the chat and I will call you out in order. Commissioner Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Richard Sanford. I have 3 questions of the city, and I think I'm going to take them in order of what I think is the simplest to maybe less simple, but I don't know, maybe they're all simple. I hope so. The scoreboard on the football stadium, it's 44.2 feet wide. The display area is also 12.7 feet high. So the display area there, which is electronic, is going to be 561.3 square feet. My question is that scoreboard considered a sign per IMC, or is it exempt from the sign code?
It is an accessory structure, not a sign.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Because I know we had a comment from the public that it was outside sign code, so wanted to make sure we were clear on that. The second question regarding sound and noise and conditions 38 and 39. So condition 38 specifies monitoring twice per academic quarter, and it has 4 locations specified there around the property line. And it also requires mitigation measures be submitted to CPD for approval if the sound detected is in the noise category. Condition 39, though, specifies once per academic quarter in 3 locations, and it requires reporting only upon request. And there are no mitigation measures there. And I was wondering why those aren't consistent in terms of mitigation measures and locations on the property where the sound is monitored.
So I just lost my VPN connection to the staff report.
Perfect timing.
I know. I think I must have lost it while we were on break.
Would you like me to pull it up?
Yes, because I think that the staff report body gives a little bit more information about why these conditions are written the way that they are.
Well, let me, while I'm doing that. Yeah, I think we all lost it.
Oh, okay. I'm glad it's not just me. Let me.
I can copy
I could read them out loud or put the text in chat if you like.
Well,
It's the body of the staff report. I'm pulling up a version from the packet, the agenda packet. So bear with me just a moment while I get myself to the right place. Okay, so condition 38, let's see, and 37. This is, no, sorry, 38 and 39. So the condition 39 was originally written when it was less clear that the baseball and softball field would not have public address systems. So that's why there's a little bit of discrepancy, was to make sure that we had adequate coverage when we thought that there would be a PA system at both the stadium and at the ball field complex. So that is the source of the discrepancy. There is no longer a PA system at the ball field complex, so this may just be slightly outdated as far as monitoring locations are concerned. And we could have that revised just to use the locations in 38.
Yeah, well, I think the locations in 38 may actually be redundant. It specifies the northwestern property line around the softball field, but also the northern property line around the baseball field, the western line in the vicinity of the elementary school, and the southern property line south of the stadium. 39, it seems, is basically saying the same thing with fewer words. In other words, noise shall be monitored at the northwestern property line around the softball field, northern property line in the vicinity of the baseball, and southern south of the stadium. Now, 39, however, does not include the western property line. So I was wondering if there's a reason for that. I think basically what I would like to see would be consistency in both of those regarding the locations of monitoring. And then secondly, in condition 39, I was wondering why that occurs only once per academic quarter. It seems that could be monitored only in November during a junior varsity football game. So I would like to see not only the same locations for monitoring, but the same requirement to report to the city mitigations.
Okay, so consistency in locations,
Yeah, and
reporting.
if you understand what I mean, I do have some candidate wording to propose on amendments to these conditions at the appropriate time. I'm
Oh,
trying to determine basically, you know, if there was a reason that or in 39 monitoring occurred once, not twice per quarter. And why in 39 the applicant was not required to submit those monitoring results to the city.
the intention of 39 is that the monitoring report would be submitted to the city on request. So that's the last sentence.
Right, I see that on request, but in the previous one it says that it will be submitted to the city. It shall be submitted to the city for the duration of the period. And the school district shall provide mitigation for review and approval by CPD if levels are exceeded. In other words, that's the kind of language that, is there a reason not to have that kind of language clearly specified in 39?
There's, I don't see a reason why we couldn't have those same requirements.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I'll have some candidate language to approve, to submit when the time is appropriate.
Okay.
So I think that's covered two of my questions. Now, for the third one, it has to do with master site plan requirements for approval. And so we're really talking about IMC 18.07 here, and you just referred to, I think, 660 a moment ago.
Mhm.
So I was hoping that we would be able to pull that up for one moment and look at it. It would be 18.07.650 master site plan contents in section D.
Would you like me to share my screen, Christina?
Yes, please.
Are you able to share your screen?
Yes, 650, Mr. Sanford, Commissioner Sanford.
Right, 18.07.650.
Okay. Are you seeing this all right?
Yes.
Great.
Right. Okay, and I was referring to D. It might be a bit tiny for some people, such as
Let
me.
me see if I can.
It'll be helpful if you read it out loud, because you're right. I think it might be small for people who are listening to see that.
Right, who are not seeing the screen, sure.
I have zoomed in. I need to relocate back to the section that we're looking at. Trying not to go too quickly to give people motion
Yeah, it's
sickness.
650. Right.
All right, here we go. 650, the master site plan contents.
Right, and in section D, thank you, that's great.
Okay, and this states D, property improvements plan, a plan providing for all improvements, including
Yes.
streets, utilities, and public facilities to be dedicated or otherwise given to the city, which shall include 1, assignment of responsibility for the cost and construction of those improvements, and 2, a schedule to indicate at what point in the proposed development process those improvements are to be completed and dedicated to the city in order to ensure that those necessary services are provided with each appropriate phase of the development.
Thank you. And if you could read the introductory sentence to this entire 1807-650, a project development.
A project development site plan and supporting data of the master site plan shall include at a minimum all of the following.
Right. So in D, having 228th Avenue Southeast in mind, where in our application documents do we have a plan for all improvements, including streets, which shall include assignment of responsibility for the cost and construction? And number two, a schedule to indicate at what point in the proposed development those improvements are to be completed. I know that we have plans for 228th. I understand we now have a permit submitted with City of Sammamish for 228th improvements, but I don't see clear assignment of responsibility for cost and construction. And I'm asking this because this is a potentially fraught shared responsibility, it seems to me, between several relevant parties here, and also a schedule to indicate at what point in the process those improvements are to be completed and dedicated to the city.
So 228th Avenue Southeast is owned by the City of Sammamish, not the City of Issaquah. So our city will not be receiving those. We do also understand that this is going to be a larger partnership effort in managing, especially the intersection to the school. And so we do have some requirements in our recommended conditions to facilitate an interlocal agreement. But we won't be receiving 228th Avenue Southeast improvements as part of this project.
Will we be receiving a schedule to indicate at what point those improvements are to be completed?
So we have a conceptual construction schedule that's included. I think the most recent version is in the phasing attachment. The number I'm not familiar with off the top of my head. I think it's in the technical reports and studies section. So we do have a conceptual schedule that talks about when those improvements will be completed. Yes.
Is that from the City of Sammamish?
It is from the applicant.
And do we have an assignment of responsibility for cost?
We have, trying to remember which attachment this is in. We do have information from the applicant acknowledging that they are responsible for construction and that they will be dedicating the improvements to the City of Sammamish.
If there is somebody from the applicant team that can assist with this question, provide more detail, that would also be fine at this point, since we're still in the question and answer point. So Commissioner Sanford, if you want to direct your question to the applicant to get additional information, that would be fine, or if you're satisfied with the response from staff.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Because this is a clear requirement for approval of a master site plan, which sits above all the permits that we're considering here. I think it is important to have a clear assignment of responsibility for cost of this transportation improvement.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. So 100% of the improvements shown within 228 will be funded by the applicant, the school district. There's some information about it in our original cover letter. That's part of the record, but all of those improvements are being paid for by the school district. There was discussions about a sharing outside of this project for additional improvements. We don't have any agreements to that at this time. So there's a chance that Sammamish may extend the improvements beyond what's shown on our plans. That would not be something the school district would be a part of. The second part of your question about the schedule. So we do have construction schedules we've submitted to the city showing starting construction and doing those improvements. I think the bigger piece of this is when those get completed and turned over to the city. And based on the way the conditions are set up, it's prior to temporary occupancy of the building. So before we get to that point, we have to work through that process, get a permit with Sammamish, construct the improvements to Sammamish's satisfaction, and turn over the right of way to them, which is a process in itself, and it's definitely going to take a significant amount of time to work through that while we're building the building and doing all the site improvements, which is why we submitted those permits early in the process.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Commissioner Dillon, you have a question?
Yes, a couple actually, and one clarification first. So, Ms. Hayworth, I want to verify that the MSP and the SDP approvals, those come before any kind of construction permit. So no construction permit can be granted until these are approved.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So a couple questions that are somewhat related to phasing. I thought I had seen in here somewhere in the conditions, and I'm not seeing it now, so it may be there and I'm just missing it. So obviously the improvements on 228th as the only access to the school are really critical to this project happening. Can we put a condition on the construction permit that a construction permit cannot be approved until the city of Sammamish has granted a permit for the 228th improvements?
For that question, I think I would like to defer to Lucy, if you're available to speak to that.
So just to confirm, the link that Commissioner Dillon, was it the issuance of the Sammamish permit prior to the issuance of a permit by the city of Issaquah?
Yes. Because as soon as a construction permit, my understanding is if the city of Issaquah issues a construction permit, then work on the site can begin. And the impacts of clearing and grading, if something happens and Sammamish does not improve the 228th improvements, then those impacts have already happened.
Correct. I am not aware of we could link the occupancy of the building to the completion of the access improvements. I'm not sure that we would have a basis in code for not issuing building permits, construction permits prior to the issuance of that. We often get permits in a different order, and it's about completing all the improvements prior to occupancy, but not requiring the permits to be issued in a certain order.
Okay. And then my other question related to phasing and the phase 2. I think the language that was added to condition 12 gets at a little bit at the uncertainty of whether phase 2 would occur. And again, one of my concerns with the phasing, and I understand that it's not the development conditions or development commission's purview to decide whether that construction is needed or part of the project. But again, those impacts, the clearing and grading, which really are the most significant environmental impacts. They can be mitigated, but not fully in all areas, can happen as soon as we have a construction permit. And I guess I'm looking for some level of an option to provide some additional level of protection for the areas that are not immediately needed for phase one. In terms of preventing unnecessary clearing of areas that may not be part of the project at some point. And admittedly, I'm new to this process, so I'm not completely sure where our boundaries are. So other commission members, if you have thoughts or can kind of guide me on this, that would be helpful too.
So one thing that I would like to point out is that the applicant, the proposal complies currently with all tree removal requirements, even if they clear the phase 2 area but don't ever build the elementary school, they're still in compliance with tree removal requirements. So there wouldn't be a basis for preventing them from doing that as part of their phase 1 work.
Okay.
Are those your questions, Commissioner Dillon?
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Morgan?
This is, maybe it's too much detail, but I'm just curious about the question about item D in the property improvements plan. So that's, I think it was pointed out, so these are plans for improvements for streets and public facilities to be dedicated to the city with a capital C, meaning the city of Issaquah. So as you mentioned, since the street improvements would not be dedicated or otherwise given to the city of Issaquah, technically they wouldn't fall under this category, it would seem. But it still seems important. And I wonder, as a side note, if it might be a reason as part of the Title 18 Land Use Code revisions to change this to say given to the city or any other city as part of this project. I think the way it's written, it's only for items that are given to Issaquah, not other cities.
That would be another question that I would kick over to Lucy.
I noted. I think we're reviewing all of the processes as part of Title 18. And it is a good point that we share boundaries with some other cities, and that if these criteria are being retained through the Title 18 process, that we should take that into consideration. I think, as we have discussed with the Planning Policy Commission, this master site plan process may not continue forward.
Okay. And in this case, we would treat this, in this case, would we view this as when we say given to the city, we would include what's being given to the city of Sammamish?
I believe city is defined in our code as the city of Issaquah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Are there other questions for staff or the applicant from the commission? I want to follow up on the street and frontage improvements. This is an unusual one for us. We're on the city boundary here, and that the project relies on modifications to facilities that are under the direct control of the city, so they're Sammamish. So can you talk a little bit more about the agreement or approval process for those frontage improvements between Sammamish and the city of Issaquah? And the reason I'm asking the question is that at what point is the confidence, 100% that there's an agreement on those improvements, the configuration, maybe not all the engineering details, but the configuration of those improvements along the process in the development of this project. So either the applicant or staff, whoever feels most informed on that question, could. So again, I'm asking what is the nature of the agreement, the documented agreement, when we get to that level of understanding of the improvements for the project?
So I'll talk just briefly about what we've recommended in the conditions, and then for any additional details, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the applicant. So what we have required is that the applicant provide materials for an interlocal agreement or a similar instrument that would be worked out between the city of Sammamish and the city of Issaquah, knowing that the city of Sammamish will own, operate, and maintain those improvements, the roadway improvements, but that they will be providing access to some property that remains within the city of Issaquah. We're not at a point where we can require or make this project beholden to an agreement that still needs to be negotiated between two other parties that aren't specifically proponents of this project, right? So we have just required that the applicant facilitate that process, and it would be through an ILA that at this point is very fledgling, to my understanding. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd or Marnie.
Maybe
You
I'll,
want to take the lead and I'll pile on?
that would be good. So maybe what I'm about to say might make this more confusing for a second, but so we have multiple right-of-way permits. So we're doing improvements in the city of Sammamish along 228th. We're also doing improvements to 43rd. So if you notice when you come up the hill towards our project, so you're coming northbound up that hill on 228th, it narrows right before you get to the city of Sammamish, where it loses lanes and goes down to a 2-lane road. We're improving that to get to the sidewalk that was connected to a 4-lane section up to the city limit line. So there's a little portion of it which we have submitted for right-of-way permits in the city of Issaquah for that portion. And then the portion in Sammamish, you've heard we've submitted, we've been through a round of comments. I think we're really close to having the details figured out of the curbs are in the right spot, the lights are where the city's gonna want them, the stormwater functions the way it's supposed to. We're going to get down to the level of detail. This paint stripe needs to be moved a little bit, and the tapers slightly different, those types of things, which are going to take a little bit of design to get through and work through to make sure everyone's happy. I mean, it's a big improvement project that we want to make sure is right for everyone involved, making sure you get all the conduits connecting things and the way they want. We also need to relocate the power. There's existing overhead power along the frontage that needs to be relocated so that we have space to actually build those road improvements. So that involves PSE and actually moving those lines. They do the design of it, and which is why being conditioned before we can start to get a permit is a little bit troubling from the applicant side. I can't control PSE and how quickly they're going to do that design. And Sammamish won't give us a permit until we get through that process. So it's something we're 100% working on. We know that that's a key to getting this done. The road improvements, if we started on them and worked continuously, we think we could finish them in about 9 months. The high school takes significantly longer than that to build, somewhere in the 16 to 20 month range. So there's a little bit of buffer where we can be doing work on site, working on the high school, and then starting on those improvements. But obviously we can't open the school without a functioning traffic system to meet our SEPA conditions. And as a result, we will have those improvements done and dedicated to the city prior to opening the school.
And Todd, I'm going to add on about the benefit of what the school district is doing to the city for the city of Sammamish. The code that we were reviewing talks about building improvements and then dedicating them to a city, whether it's city of Sammamish or Issaquah. These are different. These are actually being built within city right of way already. So the city already owns them. So they have to approve what it is that we're doing. The improvement that has been proposed is within what the long range goals are for the city of Sammamish to widen all of 228th and the one remaining section that has not yet been improved out to at least 5 lanes. Normally, when a development would come in, it would build a half street improvement, so only half of the road, and then some other future development would build the rest of what's in the long range vision. The school district is building the full width of this roadway for over 1,700 feet. It's a huge chunk of then taking that responsibility off of the city of Sammamish. So there's a big benefit to the city of having this project and constructing such a big improvement. The interlocal agreement that we're talking about is that there will still be a section between just north of 40th Street and Pine Lake Road that is still the city of Sammamish's long-range plan to widen that out to meet the full width of that road. What they would like to, they are looking at their next funding round and wondering whether or not if they were to get some funding to widen that final piece, how that would be coordinated with the city's, with the school district project. So those are the types of things that we're talking about. As Todd said, we are very close to having them approve all of the details of what's in the school district element of it. And then they're still working on whether or not they can extend that and really leverage this project to finally complete 228th up on the plateau.
And I would just, to circle back slightly to Commissioner Dillon's as well as Chair Brennan's questions. Proposed approval condition number 50 is the one that requires the roadways, the pathways, the utilities, and related improvements to be completed for each phase prior to certificate of occupancy. And so it's when the impact is generated that the improvements have to be completed. And so I just direct you to condition 50 relative to that.
Great. Thanks for the additional background and information and pointing back to the condition. The reality is that the school district's not going to proceed until they've got a high level of assurance that they've got what they need on the road improvement, because sitting on a partially completed building is too much risk. So I'm satisfied with the answer. Thanks. Are there other questions from the commission? Okay, I'm seeing no additional questions. So just to be clear, so once the public hearing is closed on a quasi-judicial matter, no additional testimony can be taken. So the commission will be limited to questions to staff only, and then our deliberations and finally voting when we're ready to move to that place. So I want to make sure before we close the public hearing, everybody feels that they've adequately had their opportunity to ask questions and get responses. If not, we can continue to share questions and concerns amongst either commissioners or with the applicant with additional questions. So again, want to make sure we've exhausted our opportunity for any questions that anybody might have. So if there's anything lingering, because once we close the hearing, we've got to move forward with deliberation. We can ask staff for additional information that's been presented already if we want to look at something, but we won't be able to go back to the applicant and ask for additional information at that point. A last call if there are additional questions at this point before I recommend we close the public hearing. Okay, I am hearing none. So you've asked your questions. Does any commissioner object to closing the public hearing? I am seeing no objections. The hearing is now, the public hearing is now closed. So it is now the record in front of us that we begin our deliberation. Any comments that commissioners have, and now is an opportunity to make comments about the project. And then at some point we can move, if we're ready, to any motion to approve or recommend approval or denial of the project. So commissioners, any comments or suggestions on how we want to organize comments on the project? If you have a comment, just type comment in the chat box. Commissioner Sanford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Richard Sanford. Question regarding order. I have a couple of amendments to the conditions I'd like to propose. Is this the appropriate time, or do they need to come after a motion regarding approving or denying the permits before us?
Yeah, I think the appropriate time to submit modifications to the conditions would be after we have a motion. We can begin with a motion if that's where you would like to start. We can continue deliberations when there's a motion and make amendments to conditions or add conditions to the motion. Either way is fine. Anybody have a preference on how to proceed? We can make comments. If you have Commissioner Sanford, I'm thinking the conditions that you're talking about were the noise-related conditions that you were speaking about earlier.
That's correct, 38 and 39.
Okay. Maybe to start with general comments, I would suggest maybe some general comments on your assessment of the proposal before we move to a motion. Does anybody want to provide kind of their general assessment of the proposal? Commissioner Morgan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Brennan. First of all, it's an amazing amount of public input that we've had on this project. I don't think I can remember in any project that we've worked on that we've had this many public comments come in and testimony to the interest people have in their community, and people from both sides of the approve, don't approve kind of question. But in general, it seems to me that the staff has added enough conditions and requirements to the project to get it to meet the requirements of both the SDP and the MSP process in terms of what we can control, and that there are things that are definitely out of our control in terms of saying whether it's, our zoning's appropriate or some offsite effects, things like that aren't within our purview. But in general, in terms of what is within our purview, it seems like it's been covered.
Are there other commissioners who would like to share their comments about generally about the proposal? Commissioner Sanford.
I'd like to say that unfortunately, I am still not completely comfortable with the agreements regarding 228th Avenue Southeast, being as it is a high level requirement of the master site plan contents. However, I am persuaded that there is enough information that may not be readily accessible, but that does exist within the applicant's submittal and within the arguments that we've heard tonight that I can go with it. And I think that, again, to agree with Commissioner Morgan, very impressive, the engagement of the community, very rewarding, very fulfilling to see that. And I guess lastly, it's not 100% in my opinion, but the perfect can't be the enemy of the good. And in this case, I think it's the common good.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanford. Are there other commissioners that would like to offer a comment at this point? Commissioner Akeda.
Thank you, Johnny Ketta. This has been an amazing amount of public input. I've been on multiple projects. I've never seen this before. The staff work has been impressive. Most of my questions have been answered just through the commentary from Lucy and from the applicants. I appreciate this. This is a difficult decision because there's so many wild cards in this, but I do think that there's been enough staff work that addresses my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Brenner.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Soa.
This is Richard Soa. I've had it always to me is frustrating to work with the public and try to separate out the things that the Development Commission has responsibility to and an opportunity to deal with and what they can't. And I think that it was real interesting in listening to the comments from the public as to some of the things that they just didn't like, but they weren't in the purview of the commission. So I do as well respect the fire out of the quantity of comments from the public. I think that the discussion earlier today when we first started that talked about really separating out those things that we could control and the things that we couldn't, if that's the way to say it, was really valuable. And I hope that the members of the public were able to listen and hear that, because it was really vital. I think the staff did a great job. I think the applicant did a really great job. And it's always a little difficult when you get experts from both sides questioning the validity or the capability of the others. But in all, it was a good job. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Soa. Commissioner Dillon.
Thank you, Chair Brennan. Patty Dillon. I agree. I think with the other members of the commission that there are parts of this project that I am a little bit nervous about. I think most of those elements, though, are out of our control. And thank you to staff for the focused report and pointing us toward what we are charged with looking at here. And also, I'm hearing from the applicant a commitment to hearing the public comment and addressing those things that they can within the scope of their own project. So with that, I think I'm comfortable moving forward as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Dillon. I'll just offer a few comments aligned with what I'm hearing from the other commissioners. But first, just to thank everybody, I think, that's been involved with this for the significant time, financial investment, and emotion, I think, that's been invested in advancing this project. These are important community facilities, and they're always difficult to site. I'm thinking back at the Issaquah High School expansion project and middle school and the challenges that those presented. These are even more significant. There are limits, as others have said, to what the commission has the authority to respond to. I think what has occurred, though, as I think back at the community conference, that this project has changed since the community conference. The buffers have been expanded. There's some additional adjustments to the site layout, some architectural changes to the buildings. So there has been influence. This property is, though, however, zoned for a school facility, and that's, again, outside the purview of the commission to make a determination as to whether or not this is an appropriate use. That decision has already been made. So we're just working to try to ensure that we can make it fit as well as possible as we can in this particular location and minimize the impacts. There's no way to eliminate impacts when you're talking about development, but can minimize them. And I think some significant progress to do that, it has been made, and I appreciate the work of the design team and the staff and the community in making those changes happen. But I am satisfied that we have aligned with the parts of the city code that we're obligated to ensure that there's compliance with, and I think there's been an exhaustive amount of information provided. So I am also ready to proceed forward. So we will need a motion to take the next step here if we are prepared. Commissioner Soa or Commissioner Soa?
Chairman Brennan, I wanted to make one more comment that I forgot. I've been a member of the commission on a couple of different school expansions and different things, and I think that the Issaquah School District staff deserves a certain note of appreciation, because while some of the public didn't feel like their comments or concerns were being addressed, I thought they really exercised a pretty good amount of flexibility in trying to accommodate that input. And so I just wanted to say that I thought they did a good job.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Morgan.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Development Commission recommend approval to the City Council for the Master Site Plan, Site Development Permit, and Administrative Adjustment of Standards for Providence Heights High School and Elementary School, permits number SDP 20-00001, MSP 20-00001, AAS 20-00012, AAS 21-00001, AAS 21-00002, AAS 21-00005, and AAS 21-00006, as described and evaluated in the staff report dated February 16th, 2022, with attachments 1 through 110, which includes the briefing response memo attachment 107, dated March 11, 2022, new attachments 111 through 114, added this evening, March 16, 2022, and project drawings and reports received September 25th, 2020, and all subsequent submittals up to March 16, 2022, and subject to the conditions therein.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Soa. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chair, I would like to propose a condition 57, if I could.
A real quick check. I don't know that we've officially added condition 56. I think that was a recommended condition from staff, so we may want to add that condition as well. So yours, you can either be 56 or 57. We have to renumber. So
should I
make your motion?
I don't have the 56 up to.
It's up on the screen.
Oh, there. Sorry. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I move we add condition 56. If Issaquah School District cannot use the easement area for emergency access as proposed in attachment 97, then the district must go through the MSP and SDP amendment processes in IMC 18.04.530 and IMC 18.04.450 for either a major or minor amendment as determined by the criteria therein.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Dillon. Discussion on the proposed amendment to the main motion. Hearing
Seems like a good idea.
Maker of the motion says it's a good idea. I would agree with that. I think that was an area that I had some concern with as well. So call for a vote, and we can just, I think I can see everybody, so we can do this by a raise of hands. So all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. And I've got a unanimous vote on that motion. So the main motion has been amended with the addition of condition number 56.
Mr. Chair, I recommend, or I move that we add condition 57 that would state the 4-foot tall chain link fence extending west from the softball field fence shall be changed to a 6-foot tall chain link fence. And the chain link fence on the south side of the school bus driveway shall be extended to the access road.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Soa. Discussion.
And if people remember, I think the applicant had suggested, they first thought it was a 6-foot fence, but suggested they were amenable to both of those changes. And my thought in this is just to provide, not to provide, I guess to prevent sort of an easy, if you're at a football game, hop over that 4-foot fence to head into the woods and maybe over towards somewhere where you shouldn't be going.
Okay. Any other discussion? Lucia, is it possible for you to add that condition? I don't know, Commissioner Morgan read that pretty quickly. I don't know if you captured that.
I didn't, and I was, sometimes he has already typed it, and I was hoping he might be able to drop it in the chat if that was the case.
Yeah, I'll type it up in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you. My apologies, you usually are ahead of me.
It's fine. We'll get a rhythm going here. We may need to bring up while Commissioner Morgan is typing, we may need to bring up the original conditions for potential edits as well.
I have them available.
Great. Just want to make sure we give him enough time here to type the condition. We don't want to have him mistype it and have a fence running down the 50-yard line for a football field.
Any typos, you can blame my high school typing teacher, so.
Great. So you can drop those into the chat and then Lucy can cut and paste and that, boy, very efficient. Well done. So any additional, so everybody have a chance to take a look. To the access road. Was there the potential, there were, if I remember, just quick discussion on the motion, on the to the access road, there was comments from the applicant team about significant trees that were there. Is that, we don't want to accomplish that condition, we don't want to force them to remove any additional vegetation, or at least significant vegetation.
Correct. And I was hoping this could it could even just run along the parking stalls
Okay.
that are on that bus site.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I'd agree, we would not want to lose trees.
No. Any other comments or discussion on the motion to add condition 57? Commissioner
I have a comment, I guess. Is this something that needs to be stipulated as a condition of the permit at this point, or is this something that is also part of more detailed plan review later? I'm just wondering, without complete information about why they put the 4-foot fence there. The extending the one to the access road makes a lot of sense to me. It's the other one, and you know, briefly discussed that this evening. And just wondering if this has to be established at this point as part of this process, or if there's another point in the review that may be more appropriate.
I guess my thought was part of this, that one fence that's at the north end of the football field by the softball field, that's one area where there's not too much distance between that and the Providence Point residences. And that it would be, and just a 4-foot fence there creates, it's not much for somebody to just hop over and head through the woods to, or those new plantings, because a lot of those will be the new plantings that go in there and right over the other fence. But so it's, I guess in my mind, it's one way to help try to ensure a little more safety for the residents nearby. And I don't think it causes any harm because nobody's supposed to be in that area anyway.
Just as a point of order to Commissioner Dillon's question, as there was a specific fence exhibit that showed heights and locations, while it was called preliminary, I think if the commission's intent is for safety reasons, for instance, to make this change, that it then corrects an exhibit that is part of the record, and that would be the reason to proceed with the condition.
Okay, thanks, Lucy.
Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, raise your hand. And that's a unanimous, so we don't need to say who's opposed. So we got a unanimous approval of the motion. So we're back to the main motion as amended. Are there any other amendments to the motion? Commissioner Sanford, I'm not sure if you wanted to offer any additional adjustments based on your previous comments. Or are you satisfied with the responses that you received?
No, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose amendments to 2 conditions, 37 and I think they're 38 and 39, I guess. Yeah, and Lucy, I do have the text to put into the chat box, and I could talk through the changes that I've made if that would work.
If you wouldn't mind dropping them in, and I'll go ahead and put them on the screen to make them visible to both the commissioners and the public.
And I would suggest that you make a motion for the amendments and do each condition as a separate motion, I think, for simplicity for us.
Okay, so I would like to move to amend condition 38 as proposed, and I will enter the text for that into the chat box.
Okay. We're just starting to catch on to how to do this virtual efficiently, and then we're going to be back in person. I have to remember how we operate in a face-to-face environment.
Yeah, and then there's the problem though of identifying the changes that I made because I can't put change marking in there. So I think I'll just talk that. End of first sentence. It says, in addition to any monitoring required by condition 40, I think that has been rightly changed to 39, but I'm going to begin 39 with that. So I struck that here. And I also struck at the property line south of the bus loop because it seemed to be redundant to me with the location southern property line south of the stadium. And those are the only 2 changes I made there.
And this is condition 38.
38, correct.
Is there any discussion or do
I'll
Commissioner?
second that. I'll second that motion.
Oops.
Smokey
Okay.
Robinson there.
Thank you for correcting my misstep there, Commissioner Morgan. Okay, so we have a second, Commissioner Morgan. So is there discussion? We'll give everybody just a minute here to compare the language if you've got, that's what I was working on, getting the language up to compare.
Yeah. I'm attempting to do it in track changes, but I'm having difficulty identifying where the changes are.
That's right. Yeah, those are the changes.
Is that the totality of the change?
Noise shall be monitored, and then I struck at the property line south of the bus loop. Because I think that was redundant with the southern property line south of the stadium, the last location there.
Does that look correct in terms
That's
of?
correct, yes.
If you don't mind me asking, in looking at the site plan, the south line south of the stadium would be about midpoint of the south property line, whereas south of the bus loop would be closer to 228th. So is just 1 point, do we think just 1 point on the south line is sufficient?
Yeah, it was hard for me to tell whether that was intentional or an oversight. We're going to be doing it south of the stadium and then south of the campus, south end of the campus.
Lucy, do you have any thoughts on that, the way it was originally written? Or Christina?
So originally, we had intended for 2 separate monitoring locations along that south property line. This is, I think, particularly important because of where some of the Providence Point residences are located. And so that was why we had the 2 separate monitoring locations there.
So to clarify, do we want to, instead of having the line or lines, and say something like along the southern property line south of the stadium and along the bus loop?
Or we could certainly just reverse the change right there. It was hard for me to tell if that was redundant or intended.
Well, or just, yeah, I think as Commissioner Dillon suggested south of the stadium and south of the bus loop.
Fine. Mhm.
So I would take
Or-
that as a friendly amendment then. Are you accepting that as a friendly amendment to the motion to add the and south of the bus loop, Commissioner Sanford?
Correct.
Okay, for clarification. Okay. That's
Sure.
helpful. Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, we will vote on the motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And any opposed? I kind of lost track of everybody. Anybody opposed? I'm hearing none. Okay, so the motion passes unanimously. Are there additional amendments to the main motion? Commissioner Sanford.
Yes, I do have one more, and that would be an amendment to condition 39. And again, Lucy, I can put the text in the chat.
And I think it'll be helpful if we do the strike draft on this one. That was, once we got it up, that was helpful to do that. So we can just take a minute to allow Lucy to put the strike draft in.
I'm not sure that it's taking all of this one, unfortunately. We'll see. Try this one more time. Maybe it's going to be 2 copy pastes.
If necessary, I could also paste in the original condition and you could talk me through the edits.
Yeah, I think it may have maxed.
Okay, let's,
Yeah, it didn't accept all my characters, and so I will add the characters beyond that.
it may be easier at this point to, if you don't mind, telling me what the, your proposed edits are to the condition and allow me to do the track changes with.
Sure, we can do that. Sure.
Can you drop a space in there at the 39 at the bullet there, so they give us a little separation in text between the 28, 38 and 39, just, make a space there. You can just hit return. Yeah, thank you. That's,
You bet.
my eyes were starting to go funny. It's getting late.
Okay, I can walk through the changes there if you like.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so an insert, it was actually moved from condition 38. It begins in addition to the monitoring required by condition 38. Yeah. Right.
Put an underline for that.
I am. I am trying. I have too many screens is what the problem is.
There you go. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm just, you can't tell what I'm trying to do.
And then all the rest of that sentence left the same through WAC 173.60.040 period. Then I changed the word verification to monitoring because that's what was used in the other condition. And now for consistency, and this may be a point of discussion, monitoring shall occur at least twice instead of once per academic quarter. And then the rest of that sentence is left the same through amplified noise sources. And then I added a sentence that may be a point of discussion. Monitoring during fall academic quarter shall occur during varsity football games, period. And then the next sentence left the same all the way through baseball outfield, comma.
Okay.
And now I was trying to approximate the same locations we had in the previous condition. So if we could just copy in what we had said in the previous condition, that's what I was trying to match there. Making sure that we included the western property line in the vicinity of the elementary school building and portables. And then finally, after south of the stadium, replace the final sentence, noise monitoring report shall be furnished to the city of Issaquah upon request. with a sentence, with 2 sentences, which I could put into the chat if you prefer. It might be a little quicker.
Okay, I wouldn't mind that.
And Lucy, one note where it says noise shall be monitored at the, and I think the at the can come out as well.
In this sentence,
Right below there where it says at, monitored at the. Yeah,
thank you.
welcome.
And in the first sentence, you spelled monitoring incorrectly.
I love typing with an audience.
That would be a Scribner's error we could fix later too.
You're better than the computer is.
Yeah, nicely done.
Okay, and those are all the changes. Yes, period. So the substantive changes, I guess, are twice per quarter instead of once. We have to do it during fall during varsity football games.
I'll second this motion.
So motion seconded by Commissioner Morgan. Discussion on the motion, which are edits to condition number 39.
I think Richard's done a great job.
Hearing no additional discussion.
I have something.
Oh, sorry.
Do we know for sure that the new high school will have a football team? I mean, the other Issaquah high schools do, but here we're stipulating that it would have to be during varsity football games. Do we need some kind of condition on that?
Comma, if applicable.
If that, yeah, I think that would work.
Well, be if applicable, or are you wanting to propose an equivalent alternative?
I mean, I think the idea would be that we do still want the monitoring to occur, even if there are not 2 varsity football games to do it at.
And of course, the idea here is to try to get at what we might assume would be the loudest event.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, if that's the outcome, which I understand, it could be monitoring. You could say during events or events generating anticipated to generate the highest level of noise. So what they're doing is it's a qualifier. It says instead of a football game, it's during an event anticipated to generate the highest level of noise. Maybe
And that could apply. That could apply for all year round too.
And I don't know if that accomplishes, since this is Commissioner Sanford's motion, what we're doing here needs to be acceptable to Commissioner Sanford.
Right.
Amendment.
No, yeah, sure. I think that's good because we're making a subjective judgment anyway regarding varsity football games. So this is really getting at the same requirement or the same goal. So to
And I
speak.
think we can take out fall academic quarter shall occur as well, with the new wording.
So we would end with after highest noise level of noise.
I guess we would need monitoring shall
Shall
occur.
occur during
That's
events. Yeah.
anticipated to generate the highest level of noise.
Sure. Mhm.
So seems like Commissioner Sanford is satisfied with that as a clarification of his motion. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. I can't see everybody say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner Sanford. Are there any other amendments to the motion, the main motion? Since I can't see everybody again, you'll need to just speak up if there are additional amendments or questions. Okay, then I think we're ready to take a vote on the main motion as amended. So all those in favor of the main motion as amended, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Anyone opposed?
Could I do a roll call since this is the main motion?
Absolutely.
Chair Brennan,
Aye.
Commissioner Sanford,
Aye.
Commissioner Soa,
Aye.
Commissioner Dillon,
Aye.
Commissioner Ikeda,
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan.
Aye.
Okay, we will need another motion to advance to create the findings of fact and submit this to the council. Is there somebody prepared to make a motion?
I can do it.
Okay, Commissioner Dillon.
I move that the Development Commission direct the Community Planning and Development Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by the Development Commission chairperson, affirming the Development Commission's recommendation to approve the Providence Heights High School and Elementary School project. Permit numbers SPD 20-00001, MSP 20-00001, AAS 20-00012, AAS 21-00001, AAS 21-00002, AAS 21-00005, and AAS 21-0006, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated February 16th, 2022, with attachments 1 through 110, new attachments 111 through 114, added this evening, March 16th, 2022, and project drawings and reports received September 25th, 2020, and all subsequent submittals up to March 16th, 2022, and subject to conditions therein and as amended tonight.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Soa. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Lucy, do you want to do a roll call on this one?
Yes, please. Chair Brennan,
Aye.
Commissioner Sanford,
Aye.
Commissioner Soa,
Aye.
Commissioner Dillon,
Aye.
Commissioner Ikeda,
Aye.
Commissioner Morgan.
Aye.
Thank you. So that completes our action on this proposed project for the high school at Providence Point. I just a couple of just closing comments. So this, as already mentioned on this permit, this is the largest record that I think the commission has dealt with, even for those of us who have been on the commission for a while. And that's a significant investment of a lot of people's time, energy, money, not only from the applicant and the city, but from the public. And the community engagement on this one has been just exceptional. And I want to thank the public for the input, the quality of the input, the compassion and I think passion behind the input. It really does make a difference. That's how the public process works. You're not always happy with the end up or with the final conclusion, but hopefully you feel like you've made a difference. This project does now move to the city council as the final decision maker for the city. I also just want to thank the commission. This one was like a second job for a while as we were dealing with getting familiar with the record and dealing with reading an inbox full of comments just about every night. So for the last few weeks. So thank you, all of you, for your participation and diligence and kind of keeping pace with all of this information. So well done, everybody. So thanks. So Lucy, do we have any other business or reports from the council?
Let's give you the rest of the night off.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Any final or closing comments from any of the commissioners before we adjourn? I think everybody's ready to go to bed. Okay, then with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 10:22. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.